Now, for more on this, let's bring in the former BBC's royal correspondent, Michael Cole, who knows that newsroom very, very well. Michael, good evening. You worked for the BBC for 20 years. You've now left. So my first question, how much are they still paying you?
Zero. Nil. Good evening, JJ. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. This is completely typical of the waste and profligacy that is endemic at the BBC. And as you so rightly say, it comes on the day of inflation-busting increase in the licence fee up to £169.50 for those of us who pay the licence fee. Others ignore it, more and more of them do so. And it is really quite extraordinary, and it is appalling that Huw Edwards is getting, even before he became ill and he had to leave to his hospital bed or clinic where he is, £439,000. Now, when I was at the BBC for 20 years, for more than a fifth of its existence, the newsreaders were people like Richard Baker and Robert Dougal and Kenneth Kendall and Moira Stewart, and they were staff newsreaders on a very modest salary, and they were very proud to do that job. My old friend and colleague, Michael Burke, said, well, what is newsreading? It's the ability to read out loud and to do it, of course, in an air-conditioned studio very far from the front line, when the reporters, like myself, went out and got the stories in. And I have to ask, JJ, how does Mr. Edwards feel about this? Because it's well advertised in interviews that he gives that he's a very committed churchgoer. He's a very strong Christian, supporter of the Welsh Church in London. How does he square that with his conscience for taking all this money and doing no work? Because Geoffrey Chaucer wrote that a labourer is worth his hire, quoting St. Timothy in the Bible, to get back to the religious side of it. Well, it's okay, a labourer is worth his hire, but what if the labourer is just, instead of using his spade, leaning on it? And that's what's happening. And we are picking up the bill for this because, quite frankly, there is absolutely no reason for the BBC to pay Hollywood salaries, because within the BBC, in the regions and in the nations, there are at least 100 people who could do that job, not just adequately, but very well. So why does the BBC have to have this star system? It is completely unnecessary. And of course, that doesn't take into account all the spin-off jobs that Huw Edwards was getting before he became ill, working for corporations, introducing this, that, and the other awards at very, very substantial sums of money. It doesn't make sense. It's reprehensible. And we are picking up the bill every time.
Yeah, look, Michael, let me tell you, sitting in a TV studio that's well air-conditioned, reading out loud, drinking whiskey, it's harder than you think it is, all right? It's a lot harder than you think. But do you think Huw Edwards has been overpaid all of this time?
I've done it, JJ. Do believe me, I do know a little bit about it. And let me just say, I work for the BBC. My work won 2 Royal Television Society awards. I covered wars, civil disturbances, riots, and all sorts of nastiness around the world. I was beaten up and put in hospital in Belfast. I contracted hepatitis in the jungles of Guatemala during the confrontation with Belize. I was very proud to do that. I was very proud to work for public service broadcasting. And the most money I ever received in a year at the BBC, wait for it, was £47,000. I didn't complain about that because I thought that was a fair salary in 1987 for a fair day's work. What I'm saying is it's absurd to pay these salaries because the BBC is bidding against itself. Who else is going to pay these people that sort of money? There is no one out there who's going to do that. The BBC in the old days used to create its stars. It didn't pay these people exorbitant sums of money. If people were getting anxious about their contract and being difficult about it, they just went out and they made another star. That's what you did. That's what the power of the corporation was capable of doing. But they're too pusillanimous these days to do anything as sensible as that. And we pay the bill. Don't forget that.
But Michael, 47,000 in 1840 is worth a lot more money today, mate. Let me tell you. But how long?
Not 1840. Not 1840, 1987. Okay. I mean, I know I'm old, but I'm not that old, JJ. Come on.
How long can the BBC keep this going for? How long can they keep on paying him while still demanding that we pay them a licence fee?
Well, it's a very good question. I've written in a new book, How Do We Pay for the BBC After 2027? That's when the Royal Charter, which is its licence to broadcast, will be renewed in whatever form, if it is renewed. And I've written in this book that the BBC needs to be broken up, it needs to be destroyed in order to be saved. And there's a very good chapter which in that book, which explains how that could be done. And it should be done. You know, it's a poll tax, the license fee, that people never voted for and they can't repeal. Nobody ever asked us about this. It's unique in the world. Nobody else, no other country has a system like this. And it's been going for 101 years, the BBC. It's had a jolly good innings. And it's time to say, enough is enough. The umpire must raise his finger and point to the pavilion and say, 101 not out. Thank you very much. Retire to the pavilion of your old memories, because the corporation, the BBC, is unique in the world because it's the only corporation ever set up not to make money, JJ, but to spend it. And because it gets the money in, £3.5 billion a year, it's very profligate, and it doesn't take care of the pennies and let the pounds take care of themselves. All it ever does is bleat for more money. And I know how bureaucratic it was. When I joined in 1968 the BBC, the brigadier running the induction course said there are 28,000 people, staff people in the BBC. Only 10% of them are to do with programmes, and that included the chaps taking the scripts round into the studio. Today, JJ, there are 22,000 people in the BBC. The difference is now, in the old days, in 68, the BBC made all its programmes. Now it buys them in from independent television companies that make them for the BBC, commissioned by them. But what are the 22,000 people doing there? Why are they there? The BBC hardly does any sport these days. It does the news. It does one or two other current affairs programmes, a bit of radio. But all the other stuff is bought in. If it had to live in the real world, like your channel does, if your channel had the amount of money that the BBC has to spend, there'd be 10 people for every one that are in your studios and in your editorial offices this evening. Believe me, that's what would be the truth.
Well, do you think the BBC are going to come out and address this? I mean, first of all, just from the workers' perspective, there'll be staff at the BBC earning a fraction of what Huw Edwards is on, but having to go in every single day and do a 9-10 hour shift, a graft, whilst their big star, who is now under a cloud of suspicion, is off sick. So surely the BBC has to come out and actually make a statement about this.
Well, I'm sure that doesn't go down very well. But listen, JJ, you're one of the younger generation. Do you ever see a young person looking at the BBC? They don't look at the BBC. The people who do watch, the older and the middle-aged people like me, that is the demographic the BBC most despises. It doesn't want older people, it wants young people. And the programmes that we enjoy, shall we say, like Antiques Roadshow or Country File, they're now packed with politics, with wokeism. You know, you cannot see a programme on Antiques Roadshow without bringing in slavery in one sort or another. The Country File is all about knocking the government policy on this and that. Well, we sit down on a Sunday evening. We actually don't want that, but we're beaten up with this propaganda because the BBC is a self-perpetuating oligarchy of like-minded liberal people. And they think that their views is the right one, and they're prepared to stuff it down everybody's throats. Well, everybody else is fed up with paying. If they want to have a station like that, put it on air, make it a subscription channel, and see how many people sign up for it.
Yeah. Well, Michael, as I've got you here, and you are a royal expert, can I just ask you quickly about Balmoral opening the doors for £150 afternoon tea in the Queen's favourite home?
Yes, yes, JJ, I am a royal expert, and I think this is a fascinating story. And what lies behind it is this, is that King Charles doesn't love Balmoral. He doesn't like it. He doesn't enjoy staying there. And whenever he goes to the Balmoral estate, he stays at Burke Hall, a rather nice house, which the Queen Mother, when she was alive, his grandmother used to use. He always goes there with Queen Camilla. And he's been working on this plan to open more of the Balmoral estate to the public. And this obviously is part of it. But I must say, you've seen pictures, JJ, of the castle, haven't you? Balmoral Castle. If you looked at the City Hall in the granite city of Aberdeen, and you looked at it on Union Street, and you looked at that building, and you'd see it was very, very similar to Balmoral Castle. And why is that? Because they were both designed by the same architect. So he feels, King Charles feels he's living in the City Hall of Aberdeen. So he was quite happy for me. This is all true, I'm telling you. He's quite happy for people to come in and spend £150 on an afternoon tea. Well, I hope they get a boiled egg with it or something special, because that does strike me as a little bit per head. That's a little bit rich. If you went to Harrods or you went to Fortnum and Mason, I think you could do it for less, or the Ritz for that matter. I think it wouldn't be £150 a head. In fact, we ought to go and try. We'll try them out one day and see how much they cost and how they compare with the afternoon tea at Balmoral Castle.
Michael, that is a great idea. I could talk to you all evening, but I've got to move on. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.